Thank you, Anne, for your incredible introduction. And I have to say, at this moment in time, I have to thank you most importantly for your extraordinary leadership of MGB through one of the most daunting periods for health and healthcare in recent memory. As we've already heard, the field of gene and cell therapy, GCT, has evolved incredibly rapidly over the last few decades. And it's now poised to deliver on the remarkable promise of treatments that can correct the root causes of disease. These one-time, potentially curative therapies repair or replace defective genes and cells with healthy ones. And it now stands at a major inflection point, with the first crop of gene and cell therapies having reached the market in the last few years and many more now under development. So to open this year's World Innovation Forum, the purpose of this first panel is to offer an overview of the exciting program ahead as seen through the lens of the forum's 4 co-chairs, all of whom are leaders in gene and cell therapy. The forum's focus on GCT at this moment calls out the really big questions: where the field can and should head in the years to come, and what that means for the industry, and importantly, what it means for doctors and their patients. So with us today are 4 distinguished experts from the Mass General Brigham system who are going to introduce the challenges and opportunities in this rapidly emerging field that will be under discussion over the next few days. And Anne has already provided somewhat of an introduction to the panelists, who are, again, this forum's co-chairs. So let me just give a little introduction where you can see their faces as I introduce them, and then we're going to get our conversation started. First, Dr. Nino Chiocca is Neurosurgeon-in-Chief and Chairman of Neurosurgery, and he himself has pioneered gene therapy approaches, including the use of oncolytic viruses against cancer, focusing on increasing anti-cancer immune responses in glioblastoma. Susan Slaugenhaupt is a scientific director of the Mass General Research Institute, and her work centers on gene discovery and therapeutic development of gene and cell therapy for ultra-rare diseases. One key issue for Sue has been how to be sure that these therapies are available to all who could benefit from them. Ravi Thadhani is our Chief Academic Officer, and his vision for academic medicine is to integrate patients as partners in each step of MGB's mission, from discovery to patient care, ensuring that this vision is as true for already established care practices as it is for newly emerging paradigms like gene and cell therapy. And our 4th is Luc Vandenberghe, who holds the Grousbeck Family Chair in Gene Therapy at the Mass Eye and Ear. And he focuses on expanding the applications of gene therapy through innovation in safety, efficacy, regulatory processes, and industry relations. So I'm going to turn now to our panel to let them set the stage for this World Innovation Forum. First, let me turn to Ravi Thadhani. And Ravi, the field of gene and cell therapy is at an important crossroads. And what does it mean for patients to be poised at this moment? What are some of the key opportunities and challenges, particularly from the perspective of a world-class academic medical center?
Thank you, Susan. As a leading academic medical center in the United States and really globally, patients depend on us. They depend on our investigators to make discoveries and to translate those discoveries to cure disease or to at least change the course of their illness. This is a challenge certainly that we accept. But with that challenge comes a responsibility. We must be sensitive to the needs of our patients. We have a responsibility to be transparent about the benefits, the risks involved in gene and cell therapies. We need to be realistic about expectations. We must also address concerns of ethics and equity, as was addressed by Anne and Chris this morning. We have to be transparent about cost. Who's going to pay for these expensive treatments? As you said, patients are our partners along this journey from discovery to translation. This meeting, in fact, begins with a session on patients, with patients, hearing from patients, their concerns, their hopes, their support systems that are critical in this journey. Throughout the course of the forum, we will also address issues of benefits, risks, costs, equity, and I certainly look forward to the next few days. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Ravi. Let's turn to Nino Chiocca next. Nino, you're an expert in oncolytic viruses and applying them to solid tumors like glioblastoma, currently largely intractable disease. What do you have your eyes on, and what's most exciting from your perspective?
Thank you, Susan, for that question. And thank you to MGB for hosting this great cell and gene therapy session. Oncolytic viruses represent a triple threat to cancer. They have three modes of action in one single molecule. First of all, there's a direct cytotoxic effect from the virus. Then there's this process where the virus helps tumor antigens being presented in a way that the immune system can recognize them better, therefore setting up anti-tumor immunity. And third, the virus can also be used as a gene therapy approach by loading it up with anti-cancer genes. I'm most excited to see how this triple threat approach works, how leaders in the field, both in academia and industry, are thinking in how to apply this to humans in clinical trials. And finally, how you can combine this with potential other immunotherapies or other anti-cancer therapies.
Thanks, Nino. Sue Slaugenhaupt, your specialty is in the really hard, rare and ultra rare diseases. How are we going to get these therapies to a broader set of patients? What are the key regulatory hurdles, and how do we make sure that patients and families aren't excluded from the promise that gene and cell therapies offer?
Well, thanks, Susan. I'm really pleased to be here and very excited for the forum. And these are the exact kind of questions that I hope that we get to talk about over the next 3 days. We've seen a few examples in rare and ultra-rare diseases, a few successes, Zolgensma for SMA and Luxturna for retinal dystrophy, both of which will be discussed later at a panel this morning. And while these successes bring extreme hope, incredible hope to patients and families, it also leaves them wondering, when will it be my turn? Who is going to work on my disease? And so when we think about for a minute the potential for these therapies is mind-boggling. There's over 7,000 genetic diseases that could potentially be treated or even cured with gene therapy. And so we need to figure out how to make these diseases attractive to industry. And we need to change, as you mentioned, the regulatory environment, because sometimes you just can't do a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial when you have 100 patients around the world. So I've worked very closely over the last nearly 3 decades with 2 different patient organizations. And what I can tell you is that the speed with which this field is moving is very exciting to them. But what we need to keep in mind over the next 3 days is that it's never fast enough for their loved ones. And so I hope that we can have a lot of discussion around how to move things forward even faster than it's going now.
Oh, terrific, Sue. Luke Vandenberghe, you're an expert in AAV technology, and you've seen the field really double down on this viral delivery method. In your mind, what are the most exciting opportunities, and what are the key obstacles?
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you, Anne, for hosting this meeting, and thank you also to all the members in the audience today. Susan, you're correct that it's been a transformative decade for the field for cell and gene therapy broadly. From an in vivo gene therapy perspective, where AAV mainly plays, a decade ago, not just about a decade ago, we were excited to see first phase 1 studies finally come to the fray with encouraging efficacy and safety readouts. And now we're at this unbelievable inflection point where we see products emerging onto the market and actually a promise of products and multiple approvals over the next couple of years. AAV, from that in vivo gene therapy perspective, has been the workhorse and certainly holds much more potential than we're currently leveraging from it. But I have to say we're also, and it's a workhorse for hepatic as well as non-hepatic targets, but we're also seeing the limitations. We're seeing basically that the current technologies are reaching their glass ceiling. And my expectation is that over the next decades, that we'll see a refinement of current technologies like AAV and transformative technologies breaking through those glass ceilings, whether it's on manufacturing technologies, clear safety limitations that the field is sometimes bumping into right now, previously inaccessible tissue or cell targets, or as Susan mentioned just earlier, regulatory paradigms that need to be revised to bring these novel modalities to the patients. A lot of this work is ongoing within MGB, and actually at this meeting, we'll touch on each of these in the various sessions that are out there. So it promises to be an exciting and interesting few days. I'm really looking forward to having discussions on all of these points.
Thanks, Luke, and thanks to all four of you for organizing what promises to be a truly amazing conversation forum on, arguably one of the most important frontiers in biomedicine. So with the time remaining, what I want to do is see if we can organize a little bit of a conversation on Zoom. It's easier in person, but I think all of us can do this. And so let me launch with one question. We'll see how the conversation goes. And I've got a couple more that I would love to get your responses to. So first, this is an emerging field which has shown incredible promise for some patients. And it is, how do we develop it into a true medical modality? And if you can just tell me the remaining barriers to the gene or the cell becoming a drug. And I would say just speak up, and I trust you all to be reasonably polite to your colleagues. Who wants to take this on? Go ahead.
Sure. I think one of the most exciting things about gene therapy has been the fact that products have come to the market. I think the challenge is that most of the products are for single gene diseases in rare patients. Unfortunately, the big diseases, the ones that affect lots of patients, are usually polygenic. In other words, they involve multiple genes or even multiple gene mutations. So how do we transform this technology from a monogenic therapy to a polygenic therapy? I think that is going to be a critical issue. And second, I think as others have said, these are not simple drugs. How do we transform these technologies that are promised plug-and-play approaches where you could use vector systems and put different genes in, but every time you do that, it's a total new drug that you have to get established to the FDA. How do we do that in a manner that's faster and less complicated regulatorily?
Other thoughts?
Yes, Susan, I think we're really in this field walking and navigating the risk-benefit equation in a stepwise fashion, right? I think the reason why this field started often with rare diseases, or at least niche applications, is that from a technical perspective, many of the things were defined, but also often for indications where we could accept a certain level of risk for a novel modality. I think over time, by getting trials and safety readouts and eventually products, we're de-risking that stepwise. But I think it's important to really work towards further managing that risk, and as I call it, controlling the pharmacology of a cell and gene as a novel drug modality. And I think there still is a ways to go. It still is very much a complex modality that often is a black box. So I think another role for actually academic institution like ours is to make this into a true scientific modality, not just a drug modality.
Other thoughts?
Susan, I may chime in here and take a point that both Nino and Luke brought up, and that is the unique environment of the academic medical center, where under one umbrella we bring the patient, the clinician, and the investigator to understand not only the natural history of the disease, but also to understand what's important for patients. What risks are they willing to accept? What endpoints are important, as Luke said, from a regulatory standpoint on one side, but what is important for them? What's critical in terms of altering the course of their illness? And again, the transparency that we talked about. And I think that's where the academic medical center plays a unique role. And then taking off from what Nino said, the sort of monogenic disease and the polygenic sort of outcomes that we face, there are multiple outcomes that investigators should be able to address or could address. And again, hearing from patients directly makes this actually much more critical to have the environment of the academic medical center sort of spearhead this effort.
Yeah.
I would just pick up a little on what Ravi was talking about, the role of the academic medical center. And he mentioned, this is where the investigators are. And for many of the rare and ultra-rare diseases, there's often one scientist in the world who understands the biology and has studied that gene, more than anyone else, and frequently one clinician in the world who's seen many of the patients. And so I think that getting these experts partnered with industry to move these technologies forward is the way of the future, and it's the key to our success.
Thanks. There's so many deep and interesting questions. Of course, we've got several days to explore them all, but Nino mentioned something that I find, kind of, bends my mind, which is that, how do you industrialize what is now a bespoke approach? And, what are the manufacturing challenges? You all have mentioned regulatory challenges, but, when you pick up a prescription from the pharmacy, we rarely think about the incredible supply chain and manufacturing process that creates millions and millions, billions of pills that people are taking all over the world. So, and this is a very different modality. So, how are all of you who are on the front lines thinking about how do you turn a bespoke treatment, hand tailored to each individual, into something that can be available to anyone who has a rare disease, but rare diseases, again, occur all over the world and in all kinds of communities. What are your thoughts about moving this from a one-off treatment for a single patient to something that can really be applied more generally?
Yeah, Susan, I can jump in there. And I think building on what was just said about kind of the pivotal role of the academic center here, I think here we have to recognize the important role of industry, right? And especially actually the partnership with industry, of where obviously the patient, sometimes the innovative science comes, but then that key piece of industrialization on all the levels we just discussed. And I think arguably this field has already shown in its history, more than maybe some other fields, that interface is so important to bring innovation to patients, right? Many of the drugs that are currently approved in this field originated from academic centers, but needed that key industrialization to make them real. And I think that interface, which has happened actually quite collaboratively, has been key to making that a success.
I was going to make the argument that clearly from the manufacturing and industrialization approach, having a one-size-fits-all treatment is a great idea. And that's what we've been doing with drugs in general. I think that the bespoke approach is really a personalized medicine approach. And as we dwell more and more into each individual's genetic makeup, each individual's different genetics, I think bespoke approaches are going to become the norm. We're going to be tailoring treatments to each patient because each patient is an individual, maybe small groups of patients. And so I think what we will have to think about is how do we industrialize that rather than the other way around? How do we industrialize bespoke approaches to small groups of patients? Because I think that is going to be the future of medicine.
I'll just pick up on what Nino just said, and that is that many of the diseases that we're trying to tackle are very slowly progressive neurologic diseases and others that are vary remarkably from patient to patient. So there's no typical patient. Right? They're one-offs. And I think that, as Nino mentioned, these are the way we have to tailor these therapies. And we have to think about clinical trial design and ways that we can approach this such that using biomarkers, for example, to measure target engagement, or other types of using the patient as their own control, other types of new and novel ideas around bringing these therapies to patients.
So all of this raises a very important question, which we at academic medical centers don't generally bend our minds to. But what are we thinking about when it comes to pricing and access? When we're talking about bespoke, hand tailored, all of this work that involves a single patient in any individual's hands. And any just quick thoughts, and then we have about I would say 15 seconds. So this is the lightning round. Any thoughts about pricing and access?
Yeah, absolutely, Susan. Look, equity, access are absolutely critical to our mission, and the relationship between us and industry really is critical from the get-go, so they understand those needs. And we're fortunate to be in that environment where we can keep those interactions and keep us honest to those endpoints.
Well, panelists, thank you so much. And it promises to be a very exciting forum. I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.